If you're watching the news or the headlines and wondering what's really going on between the Gulf countries, China and the United States, this conversation will make sense of it. My guest, Zeinab Raboua, joins me today. She's a research fellow who looks at power, not just from one capital, but across all of them, Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and beyond. What I appreciate about her is she doesn't just tell you what's happening. She connects the dots. Why the Gulf is making moves on its own terms. Why BRICS is suddenly real. And what's this new wave of non-alignment actually means. Let's get into it. Mr. Raboua, thank you for being with us. The Gulf used to be the battleground for influence. Washington had the security line or the security file. Beijing had trade with them. But now, how do you see and describe the situation? Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, are they still playing that partnership with China and the United States, trade and security? Or right now, these countries in the Gulf are playing their own game, picking what works for them without apology?
Yeah, it's well. Thank you first of all for this and for having me. I think that there is definitely a shift, and I think it really started with Saudi Iran normalization through Beijing. I think it, of course, actually started with Beijing having a huge eye on the Middle East. The Middle East is very important for China, especially on oil, gas, for energy security. They very heavily depend on the Middle East, especially on the Gulf, on Saudi Arabia and others. And I think that the Chinese have been looking at it. I mean, they already had a military base in Djibouti. They already have very strong trade partnerships with a lot of these countries. But they also are thinking about how to expand their partnerships without going to a direct confrontation with the United States. And of course, the way they do it, it's called the wave of reconciliation. It's really a type of strategy that the Chinese Foreign Ministry has been pushing, where, for example, they would they push for the normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They also said that they want to get involved in Yemen and have all the parties. They also said, for example, that they want to reconcile Hamas and the PLA and other things. And I think that this really indicates that China itself does not want to be diminished as just a trade manufacturer actor. I believe that they have bigger ambitions than that.
What are those bigger ambitions?
And I think the main ambition here is having access to energy and having access to strategic choke points, meaning having access to, for example, maybe a new military base, having operating there, being, for example, involved in the infrastructure of these countries. So it was very interesting when I found that the Chinese are involved, for example, in what is called the tech infrastructure, for example, of Saudi Arabia, of the UAE, and others. It's true that so there's this part where China has definitely bigger ambitions. For Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and US allies, I think they look at it a little bit differently, where the United States is not competing with China in satisfying their needs. They have, for example, 5G needs. They need, for example, some sort of infrastructure that the United States does not produce anymore. They need cheap goods or like cheap related technology and products. These are things that China can offer that the United States cannot. And I think that for them, it's about diversifying. They want to diversify their partnerships. There is a clear, especially during the Biden administration, that, for example, the way Saudi Arabia was treated was unfair. And of course, they want to... I mean, for example, Biden said that they want to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. There was, the Khashoggi scandal and all of these things. So
the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, you mean?
Yes.
And his killing. Okay.
Well, I think there are a lot of diplomatic incidents where the Saudis just felt that their voices were not heard. And especially, for example, when they were fighting against the Houthi proxies that were hitting directly their oil facilities, and they were told that they are the bad guys, they're bad actors, they are ruining Yemen, they are all of these things. And I think that the Saudis, rightfully so, saw that as an indicator that they cannot rely forever on a coherent U.S. foreign policy. And I think that it just started a debate about their diversifying partnerships. And so I think that this is one of the reasons. I believe, however, that...
But do you think that China, with the Gulf countries, as you said, they're trying to diversify, right?
Yeah.
Playing with the security with the Americans, and then the trade with China because of the goods and other important ways that makes China wants to be involved. Do you think the involvement also is political? Because I remember the Saudi-Iran peace deal was broke by China. So to what point do you think the Gulf countries and China also sees this itself, or wants to be seen as a regional stabilizer?
I think that there is that for China, that I think that that's ideally the role that China wants to play. And ideally, the role that China wants to project that it's playing. Because at the end of the day, the Houthis are still hitting Western shipments. At the end of the day, the Houthis are still operating against Saudi interests and so on. But I do think that the Gulf countries want quiet. Saudis are very much involved in the Saudi Vision 2030. They really are focused on modernizing, getting access to bigger markets. They want to diversify from oil, etc. And they see China as a good partner for that. And of course, they do so in a way that does not compete with U.S. Industries or U.S. interests. But I do think that for the Chinese, it's a little bit different. What they're trying to do is that, first of all, the Chinese have a very a privileged and a cordial relationship with Iran. And they've had that since really the inception of the CCP and of the start of the Iranian Revolution. And because of that, they have a similar anti-Western view that that the United States, the Western world, is depraved, is decadent, and therefore it is rightfully so that either the Chinese, the Iranians, or maybe together and with the Russians, can develop some sort of multipolar world. The Chinese and the Iranians do agree on this alignment. And you can see that reflected in the type of investments that the Chinese have been doing inside Iran. It's on every level, to the point where I saw in a press, of Iranian press, I think a year ago, where the Iranians complaining about how much the Chinese have invested in their country, and that they basically are a junior partner of China. And so the Chinese understood also that Iran was a threat to all of their neighbors. There are threats to Iraqis, to Syrians, the Gulf Sea, Iran as really a major problem because of the proxies, and also the nuclear ballistic missiles. The Chinese understood that they can leverage that, because being Iran's friend can also be an asset. And so they went to the Gulf, to Saudis and others, selling the idea that they can tame Iran, make sure that Iran does not hit them, and that they can be the ones who can guarantee that.
But why do you think Saudi Arabia didn't break the peace deal with Iran with the United States? Why also the United States didn't try to make that move, you think?
Well, first of all, because it goes against how to tackle Iran. Iran cannot really be contained diplomatically. I think this is something that the United States have tried years and decades. The Iranians are building ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. They are financing proxies. They're financing proxies now beyond the Middle East. They're going to Africa.
The United States tried to contain Iran through the nuclear deal, and then they failed? Is that one of them?
Well, there's more than that, I think. I think there are other diplomatic outreach. I mean, I think the GCPOA and others are maybe like the major examples of that. But for the United States, Iran is really a threat that goes beyond being a threat to the Gulf.
The Gulf states still host US military bases, but also they are inviting China for investment and for tech. So the shift, is it abandoning or just like leverage for something else? Because for a lot of people, it's more than diversifying.
Yes, so here's the thing. I make the distinction between what the Gulf is trying to do and what China is doing, what the United States is trying to do. I think the Gulf is genuinely diversifying. Of course, they are going to use.
But what is the purpose of that diversifying? Like, this is what I want to understand.
Yes,
is it to use it for their own benefit or to leverage and maybe use it politically with the United States to get something else?
Well, it's really a little bit of both, because as I said, it's maybe it can be a trade-off or something of this sort, but I definitely think it's about having another option when all options are being exhausted. But I do think that the Trump administration is trying to reverse all of that. This is why Trump's major visit to the Gulf was really about making huge deals in AI and technology, because all of these sectors were sectors dominated by China. So it's really about I think that this administration is reversing that by being in places where the United States was simply not. And by that, you neutralize the China option. So of course, I think that we are in this moment where the United States is going to reinforce and reassert its influence in the Middle East, which is why they're in Syria and other places. But I do think that there is definitely a realignment happening. Of course, they have military bases, etc., because it's a U.S. dependency. But of course, this administration is trying to reverse a lot of it.
Let's talk about a topic that you don't like, BRICS. BRICS is not a slogan anymore. It used to be a word that or acronym tossed in between economists or in summits. Now it is an idea that's being implemented by so many countries, and other countries are even expressing their interest in joining BRICS. Why do you think right now Trump is threatening other countries when they express their interest in joining BRICS?
Because I think Trump, and I totally agree with Trump on this one, that he sees it as an anti-Western platform, an anti-US platform. It explicitly is that.
So you think it's not just about money or another currency or another form of trading with a monetary form. It is a platform against the United States. How so?
Well, I think that there are two things that really rule the world, and it's money and weapons. And if you start a platform where you create a parallel system that actually competes with the U.S. financial system, then you are explicitly trying to diminish and erode U.S. influence. And I think that Trump really sees it that way, which is what it actually is. Of course, for these countries, for example, for India and some others, it's really a new. I mean, it's part of their doctrine, non-alignment. They want to diversify. They want to have relationships with everyone. For example, a country like India has Russia and China as neighbors. They have to discuss. So why not? But at the same time, I think that going after the BRICS is a good way to signal that that the current order is a U.S.-led order, and as long as the Chinese are developing others, then they need to be countered. Because I think that the biggest challenge, I think, of this century will really be about China and the bloc is trying to constitute with Russia and Iran. And I think that taking the right steps in countering that will be crucial.
But many other countries are joining, right? Right now, there are 11 countries, and they are showing that interest. But also Saudi Arabia and UAE expressed the interest in BRICS. or accepted the invite, but they said that they are interested in BRICS values. Is this the values, or is it just the economic perks, what the interest, the economic interest that they get? And similar to what you said earlier, that they are diversifying. But to what point this diversification can go against American interest?
Well, I think this is really where it goes against it. Of course, they are going to accept the invitation or really, start talks. I think Saudi Arabia is not part of the BRICS and others, but they're not going to express how bad it is, as long as the United States did not have a specific position on it. For a long time, the United States did not have a strong position against the BRICS. Now it has one, and it's going to force its allies to pick and choose. And I think that this is where the Gulf countries will have to mitigate some of that.
But to what point that strong, aggressive position that Trump is taking against BRICS might alienate some allies? Because of the reason or justification can be by other countries, we want to have economic perks and we want to diversify our economic portfolio.
Yeah, well, I think this is where the investments and also the deals that the United States did with the Gulf recently are here to shift the balance of that. Because at the end of the day, I think you saw the speeches and other things, that Saudi Arabia remains a very strong U.S. ally. And if they have to choose, I believe that they will be on the U.S. camp. Of course, they have their own problems and issues and etc. But I think that this is really where it's going. I might be wrong.
Trump threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS countries, and also threatened some countries who would think of joining BRICS and probably ditch the US dollars. Is the threat would be viable if they didn't ditch the US dollars, but also wanted to use both, like euros? So many countries deal with the euros and the US dollars. Would that be an option, you think, for Trump? Or it just shows, when Trump says, I want to impose 100% tariffs, it shows how serious Trump administration is against BRICS?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I definitely think that I think the euro is very different because...
Why?
Because you have a Western alliance. There's also the fact that European countries most of them are part of NATO. So there is a strong basis there. There isn't when it comes to China, Iran, Russia, and South Africa and others. And so I think he wants to cut all of it.
So the reason is that they want to use the BRICS platform just to attack the United States' interest economically in the world?
I mean, it's not explicitly said, but building a parallel system is de facto eroding U.S. influence in the world. I believe so, and I think this is why Trump signaling some of it is a good thing.
Do you think that these countries have the right to choose what financial world system they want to join or create?
The United States has also the right to choose and to act according to its own interests. And if it wants to impose sanctions because they're choosing some project that counters U.S. interests, and why not?
So what you're trying to say is Trump threatening by posing 100% tariffs is a threat as a retaliation for the threat imposed by those BRICS nations?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. I think the long-term threat of the BRICS is very real. The Chinese are learning from what the Russians are.
Is it going to be a threat for the financial world system, or a threat for the United States financial system in the world?
The current financial system is a US-dominated financial system, and it needs to remain that way because that's how Americans and how the United States can prosper. At the end of the day, it's better for the United States to go to an American bank than to a Chinese bank. And I think that it's a world that a world dominated by China, by China's financial system, will be a bad world for the United States.
Why? People would like to understand. Like genuinely, people would want to say, like, why is it bad? The world is dominated by the US dollars. It's good for the United States, but what are the negative points for having an alternative for other countries?
Well,
economically.
But I said for other countries, it's fine. They can do whatever they want. But at the end of the day, if it works against U.S. interests, there is nothing wrong for the United States for imposing sanctions on it. The other thing on sanctions or tariffs or whatever is in the playbook. But on the long term, what I'm trying to explain is that for the United States, it's always been a problem, for example, for American companies to operate in China. The Chinese try to get access to everything. They get there's a huge surveillance system that tries to spy on the United States, steal data, steal other ways that the United States can operate so that they can compete better. And I think that this is a real danger that the United States is trying to counter. So, of course, a Chinese-dominated system is actually not really a functioning system, let alone a system that the United States can prosper in.
Let's talk about the new non-alignment and who's really in charge. From Africa to the Gulf to Southeast Asia, more countries are saying, we will take your help, we will take your aid, or we will take your arms, but we're not joining your team. This is not like fence sitting, it is a new kind of power move. What does that tell you of the whole shape of how we're moving forward, financially and politically?
What I can say is that there is a huge power vacuum. And this is why China talks about the global south and Russia talks about the multipolar world. A lot of them are trying, especially, for example, Russia, they've always had ties with these non-alignment countries. This is why they're in Africa. This is why they're building the Alliance of Sahel states by going to Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and other countries. The Chinese and the Russians are basically trying to be leaders of the what is called the South.
Who's going to be the leaders of the South?
I said that they're trying at least to be the speakers of. This is the pitch that the Chinese do whenever they go to summits, etc. And for the United States, this means that because the South is still very important. That's where the Red Sea is, the Atlantic Ocean and Mediterranean. Very important if you're talking about the South China Sea. So I think that it really signals a vacuum here. Where the United States is also expected to react. So this is, I think, my analysis of it.
How do you think the United States would persuade other countries on their side when China is convincing them or pitching them that I am the voice for the global South, and Russia is convincing other countries that we have to live in a world that is multipolar, not one polarized by the United States? How the United States can persuade these countries?
Well, I don't think the United States can have or needs to persuade. I think the United States should just go the way this current administration is going, which is revising the trade partnerships, having a strong trade partnerships with African countries. A lot of these NGOs and other humanitarian agencies, I think they did a really bad job because they had a political lens lecturing African countries about how they should go about the governance, etc., when they really are suffering real security issues like terrorism, etc., for example, in West Africa. And so I think that the United States should simply shift how it's been operating with these countries, going after what really matters, which is security, trade, technology cooperation, development cooperation, economic cooperation. These are the things that are attractive to African countries, and this is why they're going to China. And I think that it doesn't necessitate. I'm, for example, against this whole idea of soft power, because I think that soft power is actually really the outcome of hard power. And if you don't have it, which is what I meant, the trade, the economic, it means you're not going to persuade anyone.
What kind of soft power you are against? Like, are we talking about aid, like US aid was helping other countries, or are we talking about the soft power media? Because right now we are also seeing that we are taking funding from US-funded outlets that usually help with the vision of the United States. On the opposite side, China, Russia, Iran is doubling the money and the funding for their news outlets speaking in the language of these countries.
Yeah.
Doesn't that play for the pitch that China and Russia wants to do in the
But
world?
what I meant was a little bit more specific, that soft power, persuading, doing these summits, these speeches about how the United States is friends with everyone, I don't think that translates in real power and real influence. What really translates is a real strategy of trade partnerships with these countries. These African countries, they have huge markets. They are rich in resources. They are rich in minerals. A lot of it is going now to China and Russia. And I think that this is where the focus should really be. Of course, on the narrative side, etc. I think that it's good that the United States keeps funding and does it in a way that helps United States project power. But at the end of the day, what the United States does speaks volumes. And I think this was the missing part when it comes to Africa, especially.
China is known for these countries to offer infrastructure. Washington is known for offering security or debt relief. To what extent these countries are benefiting from both and playing both sides?
Well, I don't think they have much choice in this. For example, let's take a country like Ethiopia. They have very fertile lands. They have huge natural resources. The only country very much interested in that, apart from Saudi Arabia and others, is really China. The United States is simply not there. U.S. companies are not there. First of all, because of the risks. It's a huge risk to take. But I think that I think it's really more about making the United States more assertive, U.S. companies more assertive, than anything else.
But you agreed that these countries are playing both sides. They're taking from China and they are taking from the United States. From one side, the infrastructure, the other side, security and debt relief. But when everyone plays both sides, when these countries play both sides, is there a risk no one ends up being accountable?
I think it depends. It depends on which country we're talking about.
So each country would be taken case by case.
Yeah, I kind of think so, because Africa, for example, is such a difficult area because it really depends on who is the backer of the security of the political establishment. A lot of it is now Russia. Some of them are anti-Western, but they're not necessarily anti-American. So I think it depends.
But is Trump taking those into consideration, like each country case by case? Because if some countries are joining China or doing some partnership with China, there are sanctions. There are trade threats also. I mean, we heard about trade threats for Canada, for Mexico.
What Trump is doing is that he is setting the stage where these countries will have to choose, because they never had to. And I think he is shifting U.S. posture, where there is now an explicit posture, where are you either part of the U.S. system, the U.S. alliance, or you're not. And I think that this is what he's doing. These countries never really had to choose. Whether they were choosing or not, this is where I'm saying it depends. Because, for example, South Africa explicitly chose China, Russia, and Iran. And now there are sanctions on it, on South Africa. And there's a huge problem with South Africa. So so this is really what I meant.
Well, thank you for explaining so many of the economic jargon for us and for our viewership and listeners. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.